On a crisp Tuesday morning at Denver International Airport, the fate of a billion-dollar airline didn't rest in a boardroom or on the stock market floor. It rested on the shoulders of one woman, Captain Annalise Roy, a pilot with a flawless record and nerves of steel forged in the skies over combat zones. She was about to command the most important flight of her airline's history, a flight that represented its salvation. But before she could even reach the cockpit, she would be met with a 5-word insult from a gate agent that would ignite a firestorm. She wasn't just denied entry to her own aircraft, she was publicly humiliated. And in the minutes that followed, her calm, calculated response would trigger a corporate cataclysm so swift and so total it would become a legend in the aviation world. This is the story of how one act of prejudice grounded an entire airline forever. Captain Annalise Roy loved the unique stillness of an airport in the pre-dawn hours. The vast concourses of Denver International Airport Den, usually thrumming with a chaotic symphony of rolling luggage and anxious announcements, were hushed, bathed in the cool, sterile glow of fluorescent lights. It was 5:15 a.m. The air smelled of industrial cleaner jet fuel and the faint, promising aroma of brewing coffee. For Annalise, this was the cathedral of her calling. At 36, she had already carved out a career that was the envy of pilots twice her age. A graduate of the U.S. Air Force Academy, she had flown C-17 Globemasters into some of the most challenging airfields in the world. Her call sign, Valkyrie, was earned not through recklessness, but through an almost supernatural calm under pressure. After a decade of distinguished military service, she transitioned to commercial aviation, seeking a different kind of challenge. She found it at Apex Air. Apex was a mid-tier carrier with a big ambition and a precarious balance sheet. They were the scrappy underdog constantly fighting for routes and market share against the legacy giants, but they had just landed the contract of a lifetime deal that was set to rocket them into the big leagues, an exclusive 10-year, $4 billion partnership with Viridian Dynamics, the world's most innovative and valuable tech conglomerate. Viridian was notorious for its exacting standards, not just in its technology, but in its partners. They demanded excellence, precision, and a corporate culture that mirrored their own forward-thinking, inclusive ethos. The Apex Viridian deal was more than just a transportation contract. It was a statement. And today, Flight 822 from Denver to San Jose was the statement's inaugural address. Annalise was handpicked to command it. It was a testament to her reputation as not just a skilled pilot, but a consummate professional. She was a Czech airman, one of the elite pilots who train and evaluate other captains. She was meticulous fare and commanded respect, not by raising her voice, but by elevating her standards. Walking through the terminal, her regulation black pilot's bag rolling silently behind her, she projected an aura of quiet authority. Her uniform was perfectly pressed, the 4 golden stripes on her epaulets gleaming. She wasn't just a pilot. She was the embodiment of the trust that millions of people place in the anonymous figures behind the locked cockpit door. She met her first officer, Ben Carter, at the designated coffee kiosk near the A-gates. Ben was a solid pilot, 10 years her senior, with a laid-back demeanor that balanced her focused intensity. "Morning, Captain," Ben said, handing her a black coffee. "Big day." Annalise accepted the cup with a nod, a small smile touching her lips. "Every day is a big day, Ben. This one just has more zeros attached to it." "You're not wrong," he chuckled. "Heard a couple of Viridian VPs are on the manifest. Susan Walsh, their head of logistics, is one of them. No pressure." "Pressure is a privilege," Annalise replied, the old Air Force adage rolling off her tongue with ease. "It means what you're doing matters. Let's go over the flight plan one more time before we head to the gate." I saw the Transcon weather report looked clear, but I've got a feeling about a pocket of turbulence over the Rockies. They stood there for 10 minutes, two professionals in sync, murmuring about fuel loads, weather patterns, and the brand new Boeing 737 MAX 8 they'd be flying. It was one of the first jets Apex had acquired as a direct result of the Viridian cash infusion, its fuselage still smelling of the factory. Everything about this flight was meant to signal a new era for Apex Air new planes, a new prestigious client, and their best pilot at the helm. As they finished their coffee and began the short walk to Gate A48, Annalise felt a familiar sense of purpose settle over her. This wasn't just another flight. This was the culmination of her career and the dawn of her airline's future. The plane was ready. The crew was ready. The executives were ready. She was ready. Nothing, she thought, could possibly go wrong. The scene at Gate A48 was one of controlled chaos, typical for a 6:30 a.m. departure. Passengers were already forming a messy queue, clutching boarding passes and oversized neck pillows. The gate agents were a flurry of activity, their fingers flying across keyboards as they tagged bags and answered a barrage of questions. Annalise and Ben approached the gate desk, their path clearing respectfully as passengers noticed their uniforms. This was part of the ritual, a small but significant acknowledgement of the hierarchy of the airport. The flight crew always had priority access. They had a job to do. At the head of the counter stood a woman in her late 40s, named Bettina. Her Apex Air name tag was slightly askew, and her face was a mask of strained professionalism, the kind worn by someone who had been dealing with grumpy travelers since 4 a.m. She was typing furiously, her eyes glued to her screen. "Good morning," Annalise said, her voice calm and clear. "Captain Roy and First Officer Carter, for Flight 822 to San Jose. We're heading down to the aircraft for pre-flight." Ben flashed his ID, and Bettina gave it a cursory glance, waved him through the crew access door, and immediately returned her attention to the monitor. "Go ahead." She mumbled, her focus unbroken. Annalise, assuming the same courtesy would be extended to her, stepped forward. But Bettina suddenly held up a hand, a gesture as sharp and dismissive as a slamming door without looking up. "I'm going to need you to wait, Mum," she said, her tone flat and irritated. Annalise paused, slightly taken aback. This was a breach of protocol. The captain and first officer always board together. "I'm the captain," she stated simply, assuming a misunderstanding. Bettina finally lifted her head, her eyes scanning Annalise's uniform, with a look that hovered somewhere between confusion and suspicion. A flicker of something disbelief, annoyance crossed her face. She looked at Annalise, a black woman with 4 stripes on her shoulders, and then gestured vaguely toward the crowded seating area. "The pilots for this flight are already here," Bettina said, her voice now carrying a patronizing edge that made the hairs on Annalise's arms stand up. "You need to wait outside with the other passengers." The words hung in the air, sharp and poisonous. "Wait outside." It wasn't just the words, it was the implication. You don't belong here. You're not one of us. You're one of them. The phrase, "wait outside," was loaded, echoing a painful history of segregation and exclusion, of being told to go to the back door. For a moment, the bustling sounds of the gate area faded into a dull roar in Annalise's ears. She saw a few passengers in the front of the line turn to stare, their curiosity piqued. Her own flight attendants, who had just arrived and were waiting to board behind her, looked on with shocked expressions. It was a moment of profound public humiliation. Her military training kicked in a lifetime of discipline that taught her to control her emotions, to never let an adversary see her rattled. She took a slow, deliberate breath, her face an unreadable mask of professionalism. "There must be a misunderstanding," Annalise said, her voice steady and dangerously quiet. First Officer Carter just went through. "I am Captain Annalise Roy, and this is my flight. I need to get to my aircraft." She presented her airline-issued credentials and her FAA pilot's license, laying them flat on the counter. "Please verify my identity." Bettina glanced at the IDs for less than a second, a dismissive flick of her eyes. She didn't pick them up. She didn't scan them. She pushed them back across the counter with one finger. "Like I said," Bettina insisted, her voice rising in volume, a self-important smirk now playing on her lips. "The pilots are accounted for. We have a male captain and first officer for this flight. I saw them myself. Now please step aside. You're holding up the line." The lie was so blatant, so absurd, it was almost breathtaking. Ben Carter was right there on the other side of the door waiting for her. The flight plan, the crew manifest, every single piece of official documentation had her name listed as pilot in command. Annalise felt a cold knot of anger tighten in her stomach. This wasn't a mistake anymore. This was a deliberate act of obstruction, fueled by a prejudice so deeply ingrained that the woman in front of her was choosing to believe a reality she had invented in her own head over the decorated officer and official credentials presented to her. "You are mistaken," Annalise said, her voice losing its warmth, replaced by the steely tone of command she used when dealing with a critical in-flight situation. "You have allowed my first officer to board while denying me the captain access to the aircraft. You are now actively interfering with the duties of a flight crew. I am asking you one last time to scan my credentials and open this door." The standoff was now attracting more attention. The line had stopped moving. Everyone was watching. Bettina, feeling her authority challenged in front of an audience, felt the need to escalate. Her face hardened, her eyes narrowing. "Ma'am, if you don't step away from the desk, I'm going to have to call airport security." The threat of calling security was a line crossed. It transformed the situation from a dispute over credentials into an accusation. Annalise was no longer being treated as a pilot being inconvenienced, but as a potential threat. "Go ahead," Annalise said, her voice dropping to an icy calm. "Call them. And while you're at it, get me your station manager. Now." She didn't move an inch. Her eyes, unwavering, were locked on Bettina's. Bettina, flustered, but emboldened by her own misguided sense of authority, snatched the phone. "We have a situation at gate A48. A woman claiming to be a pilot is refusing to cooperate. Yes, I need a manager and security." Within minutes, two figures bustled toward the gate. The first was a uniformed airport security officer, looking confused but alert. The second was a man in a slightly rumpled suit, his Apex Air Manager's badge flipping as he walked. This was Daniel Garrett, the Denver station manager. Garrett was a company man in his 50s, a middle manager who operated on a simple principle: protect the company, protect his employees, and resolve problems with minimal fuss. Unfortunately, his definition of resolving often meant siding with his staff by default and quelling any disruption regardless of who was in the right. He arrived to see Bettina looking flustered and indignant, and Annalise standing resolute, a pillar of calm in a sea of confused stares. Ben had come back through the door from the jet bridge, his face etched with worry. "What's going on here?" Bettina Garrett asked, bypassing Annalise completely. "This woman Bettina started pointing an accusatory finger, is trying to get onto the plane. She's claiming to be the captain, but the pilots are already on board. I told her to wait, and she became aggressive and refused to leave the desk. She's causing a scene." Garrett's eyes fell on Annalise. He saw a black woman. He saw his visibly stressed employee. He made a snap judgment, a fatal calculation, based on years of ingrained bias and corporate CYA instincts. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to come with me," Garrett said, his tone firm and dismissive. He didn't ask for her side of the story. He didn't ask for her name. He didn't look at the credentials still sitting on the counter. "I am Captain Annalise Roy," she stated, her patience now worn to a microscopic thread. "That is my first officer, Ben Carter. This is our flight 8202. Your employee has refused to verify my identity and is preventing me from conducting my pre-flight duties." Ben stepped forward. "Sir, she's telling the truth. This is our captain. We need to get on the plane. We're already behind schedule." Garrett shot Ben a withering look, a silent command to fall in line. He then turned back to Annalise, his expression hardening. He saw her defiance, not as the righteous stance of a wronged professional, but as the stubbornness of someone causing trouble. "Look, I don't know what kind of misunderstanding there is," Garrett said, his voice oozing condescension. "But Bettina has been an agent for 15 years. She knows what she's doing. We have protocols. Now this is the final time I'm asking you to step aside before I have security escort you from the gate area." The security officer shifted uncomfortably. He could see the 4 stripes on Annalise's shoulders. He could see the FAA license on the counter. He could sense that Mr. Garrett was steering this situation directly into an iceberg. Annalise finally broke eye contact with the 2 of them and glanced around. She saw the faces of the passengers. Some looked angry at the delay, others confused. But she also saw a few, including a woman in a sharp business suit, sitting in the front row of the boarding area, watching the entire exchange with an intense, analytical gaze. This was Susan Walsh, the Viridian VP. Annalise didn't know her by sight, but she knew this entire ugly spectacle was being witnessed by the very people Apex Air was desperate to impress. This was the moment of decision. She could continue to argue to be humiliated, to perhaps eventually be proven right after a prolonged, degrading ordeal. Or she could use the power she rightfully held. The power not just of her rank, but of the immense responsibility that came with it. Her decision was made. She slowly reached down and picked up her credentials from the counter, tucking them neatly back into her wallet. She straightened her uniform jacket. She looked Daniel Garrett dead in the eye. "Mr. Garrett," she began, and the entire gate area seemed to fall silent to hear her. "You and your agent have created a situation that compromises the safety and integrity of this flight. You have demonstrated a fundamental failure in the most basic security protocol, which is verifying the identity of the flight crew." She took a step back from the counter, creating a space of authority around her. "The chain of command, which is the bedrock of aviation safety, has been broken before we've even left the ground. Your ground staff is insubordinate, and your management is incompetent. I no longer have confidence in the ability of the ground crew at this station to safely prepare this aircraft for departure." Garrett's face went from smug to confused. "What are you talking about?" Annalise turned to her first officer. "Ben, are you with me on this?" Ben Carter looked from Annalise's resolute face to Garrett's sputtering confusion. He didn't hesitate. 100%, Captain." Annalise then looked back at Garrett, her voice ringing with the absolute authority of a pilot in command. Under Federal Aviation Regulations, Part 121, 533. As the captain and final authority on all matters concerning this flight, I am declaring this aircraft unfit for service due to a hostile and untenable ground environment and a complete breakdown of crew resource management and security protocols. This flight is grounded. We are not flying today. Silence. It was a profound, stunned silence that fell over Gate A48, the hum of the terminal, the beeping of scanners, the chatter of passengers. It all vanished, replaced by the deafening echo of Annalise's declaration. Daniel Garrett's face went through a rapid-fire series of transformations, from arrogance to disbelief, then to panic, and finally to a pale, clammy realization that he had made a catastrophic mistake. You can't do that." He sputtered, his voice a pathetic squeak. "You don't have the authority." "Oh, I assure you, I do." Annalise retorted, her voice as cold and hard as diamond. "It's called captain's authority. Look it up. My primary responsibility is the safety of my passengers and crew, and that safety has been irrevocably compromised by you and your agent. I will not command an aircraft when the airline's own staff presents a clear and present danger to operational security." Bettina looked like she had been slapped. The smugness was gone, replaced by a dawning horror. She finally seemed to understand that the woman she had dismissed and insulted wasn't just some random person, but held the absolute power to kill the flight she was supposed to be boarding. Annalise turned to her flight attendants, who were watching with wide, shocked eyes. "Crew, this flight is cancelled. Please wait for official instructions from crew scheduling. Do not board the aircraft." She then pulled out her phone and made a call, her voice now clipped and official. "This is Captain Roy. I'm grounding Flight 822 at Denver Gate A48. Yes. Reason: complete breakdown of ground security and crew management protocols. Station manager and gate agent refused to verify my identity and prevented me from accessing the aircraft. The ground environment is hostile. I repeat, the flight is grounded." As she spoke, chaos erupted. Garrett was frantically whispering into his own phone. Bettina was frozen, staring into the abyss she had just created. Passengers were groaning, pulling out their phones to rebook, their frustration boiling over. But one passenger was doing something different. Susan Walsh, the Viridian VP, had been recording the entire exchange on her phone since Garrett had arrived. She hadn't done it to post on social media. She had done it as evidence. As a top logistics expert, she understood process protocol and failure points. What she had just witnessed was not a simple customer service issue. It was a systemic rot. She ended her recording and immediately made a call. Not to Apex Air customer service, not to a travel agent. She called a number on her speed dial. Thousands of miles away, in a glass-walled office overlooking Silicon Valley, Robert Chen, the notoriously demanding and brilliant CEO of Viridian Dynamics, was in a board meeting. His phone, which was always on silent for everyone, but his top VPs, vibrated on the polished table. He saw it was Susan Walsh and excused himself. "Susan," he said, his voice sharp, "you should be in the air." "We're not, Robert." Susan's voice was tight with fury. "And I don't think we'll be flying on Apex Air today. Or ever again. I'm sending you a video. You need to see it. It's a complete disaster." Back at the gate, Daniel Garrett, his face the color of ash, was finally grasping the scale of the fallout. The cancellation of a single flight was a headache, a financial write-off. But this was Flight 822, the inaugural flight, the Viridian flight. "Captain," he pleaded, his voice now desperate, his earlier arrogance vanished. "Please, let's just talk about this. We can sort this out. A misunderstanding." Annalise looked at him, not with anger, but with a kind of detached pity. "The time for talking is over, Mr. Garrett. You had your chance to de-escalate, to listen, to simply do your job. You chose to escalate. You chose to threaten. You made your decision. Now I've made mine. My full report to the FAA and the pilots' union will reflect everything that happened here, including your and Agent Bettina's refusal to follow basic federal security mandates. The mention of the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, was the final nail in the coffin. This was no longer an internal company matter. This was now a federal issue. Annalise turned to Ben. "Let's go. We need to file our reports." Without another glance at the chaos she was leaving behind, Captain Annalise Roy and First Officer Ben Carter turned and walked away from the gate, their footsteps echoing the first tremors of a corporate earthquake they had just triggered. The gleaming brand-new 737 MAX sat empty at the gate, a silent monument to the colossal failure of 2 employees and the systemic prejudice that had allowed it to happen. The engine of karma was just starting to turn over, and it was about to roar to life. The news of Flight 822's grounding didn't travel up the Apex Air corporate ladder. It detonated at the top and rained fire downwards. The chain reaction began not in a boardroom, but in the tense, silent observation of one woman at Gate A48. Susan Walsh, Viridian's Executive VP of Global Logistics, lowered her smartphone, her thumb pressing Save on the video file. Her face, usually a pleasant mask of executive poise, was set like granite. As a logistics expert, she saw the world as a series of interlocking systems, and what she had just witnessed was a system in catastrophic failure. It wasn't just the shocking prejudice, as appalling as that was. It was the cascading breakdown of every protocol that was supposed to ensure safety and order. The gate agent's initial obstruction was a procedural error. The manager's escalation was a leadership failure. The threat of security was an institutional collapse. This wasn't a customer service complaint to be filed. This was a 5-alarm fire of brand liability. Viridian Dynamics had built its trillion-dollar empire on a reputation for flawless execution and forward-thinking ethics. They didn't partner with companies that allowed this kind of rot to fester on the front lines. In her mind, the ink on the $4 billion contract was already beginning to dissolve. She scrolled through her contacts, bypassing layers of corporate communication, and dialed a number reserved for emergencies. Thousands of miles away, in a sleek New York City ballroom with panoramic views of Central Park. Frank O'Connell, the CEO of Apex Air, was living the greatest moment of his professional life. He stood at a podium, champagne flute in hand, addressing a rapt audience of investors and financial journalists. The room buzzed with the intoxicating energy of a victory lap. And so this partnership with Viridian Dynamics is more than just a contract, Frank declared, his voice resonating with practiced confidence. It is a validation of our vision. It is the dawn of a new era for Apex Air, an era of innovation, expansion, and unparalleled service. Today, as Flight 822 takes to the skies from Denver, it carries more than passengers. It carries the very future of this company. Applause filled the room. Waiters circulated with trays of canapés. His phone, resting on the podium, had been vibrating for several minutes with texts from Denver operations, but he'd blissfully ignored them, dismissing them as minor first-day jitters. As he stepped down to mingle basking in the warm glow of congratulations, his assistant, a young woman named Sarah, pushed through the crowd, her face the color of chalk. "Mr. O'Connell," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "You need to take this call. Right now." "It's Robert Chen." Frank's smile froze on his face. A call from the CEO of Viridian himself on the morning of the inaugural flight. This had to be a courtesy, a congratulatory call. He clapped an investor on the back, excused himself with a confident wink, and stepped into a quiet marble hallway, the sounds of the celebration still echoing behind him. Robert, he boomed into the phone, projecting an easy bonhomie he did not feel. "To what do I owe the pleasure, I trust? Our inaugural flight is taxiing for takeoff as we speak." The voice that came back was not warm. It was a shard of ice. "Frank, your inaugural flight is a 5-alarm dumpster fire, and your entire company is about to be incinerated with it." The brutal, unexpected imagery hit Frank like a physical blow. "Robert, what are you talking about? What's happened? What's happened?" Chen said, his voice a low, controlled fury. "Is that I have a 2-minute video, courtesy of my EVP Susan Walsh, who is currently stranded at your gate in Denver. A video frank of your station manager and a gate agent publicly humiliating and obstructing a decorated pilot. A black woman who happens to be the captain of my flight. Your staff accused her of being an imposter, refused to look at her federal credentials, and threatened her with airport security. They did this in full view of my executive team. Frank's mind scrambled, grasping for a lifeline in a suddenly stormy sea. A misunderstanding, he stammered, the words tasting like ash. "Robert, I am so sorry. There must have been a procedural mix-up. I'll get to the bottom of it immediately. I'll have them both fired before the plane even pushes back from the gate." "Don't bother, Frank. I've already gotten to the bottom of it," Chen snapped, cutting through his pathetic damage control. "The bottom is this. Your company culture is rotten. You put people in positions of authority who are either raging incompetents or prejudiced fools, or both. This isn't a bug, Frank. It's a feature of your corporate DNA. That is not a misunderstanding. It is a systemic failure. It's a safety failure, it's a security failure, and it is a reputational failure that I will not have associated with the Viridian Dynamics brand for one more second. Robert, please," Frank begged, his voice shrinking. He could feel the sweat beading on his forehead. The faint sounds of laughter from the ballroom now seemed like a cruel, distant mockery. "Let me make this right. I'll fly to Denver myself. I'll issue a personal apology to the captain. We can make a donation, start a scholarship. Whatever it takes." There was a chilling pause on the other end of the line. When Chen spoke again, his voice was dangerously soft, the sound of a judge passing sentence. "Frank, do you remember the contract you and I signed? I suggest you reread Section 12, Paragraph B, the Morals and Conduct Clause. Your own lawyers redlined it 3 times. It states, and I quote, 'Any action by personnel that brings disrepute, embarrassment, or public scandal upon either party is grounds for immediate termination of this agreement.'" A wave of nausea washed over Frank O'Connell. He remembered the clause. His lawyers had called it the Reputation Ruin Clause, and had warned him it was airtight. What happened this morning wasn't just embarrassing, Frank. It was a flagrant violation of everything we stand for. Chen continued, his voice utterly devoid of emotion. It was a display of the exact kind of backward-thinking, institutional bias we fight against. As of 9:05 a.m. Eastern Time, Viridian Dynamics is exercising that clause. Our partnership is terminated, effective immediately. Our legal team will be in touch with yours to handle the dissolution." Frank opened his mouth, but no sound came out. It was over. A 10-year, $4 billion lifeline. Gone. Vaporized because of a gate agent and a manager in Denver. "Don't bother calling me back," Chen said, and the line went dead. Frank stood frozen in the hallway, the silent phone pressed to his ear. He looked through the glass doors at the party, at the smiling investors still toasting a future that no longer existed. He was a ghost haunting the ruins of a triumph that had lasted less than an hour. The public demolition began 15 minutes later. At 9:45 a.m., the first story hit the wires. Apex Air inaugural Viridian, flight cancelled due to operational issues. On the floor of the New York Stock Exchange, the ticker for APX dipped a few points. Traders shrugged. Delays happen. But then at 10:15 a.m., Viridian Dynamics dropped its bombshell, a terse, brutal press release sent to every major news outlet. Viridian Dynamics has terminated its partnership with Apex Air, effective immediately due to a failure by Apex to meet the contractual standards of professional conduct and operational integrity. The bottom fell out. On the live broadcast of a major financial network, the anchor was mid-sentence when a producer spoke into his earpiece. The anchor's eyes widened. "We are getting some breaking and frankly shocking news," he announced. "Viridian has just terminated its landmark deal with Apex Air. On the screen, the stock ticker for APX went into a freefall. It wasn't a dip, it was a cliff. Automated trading algorithms triggered by keywords like terminated contract began dumping millions of shares in microseconds. The stock was halted, a desperate attempt to stop the bleeding. But when it reopened, the panic was absolute. It was an electronic rout, a waterfall of red. Billions of dollars in market capitalization, the entire projected value of the Viridian deal, and then some were vaporized in minutes. The shutdown Captain Roy had initiated wasn't just about one plane sitting at a gate in Denver. It was the complete systemic shutdown of her company's future broadcast in real time for the entire world to see. The engine of Karma was just getting warmed up, and it was running on jet fuel. The fallout was not a storm. It was a clinical, brutally efficient demolition. For the individuals who had lit the fuse, the reckoning arrived with a speed that left them breathless. Karma, it turned out, flew faster than any jet. Bettina was the first. Her shift wasn't even over when two corporate security guards, their faces impassive, approached her at the now deserted Gate A48. They didn't speak. They simply stood beside her until a junior manager, a young man she barely knew, scurried over and whispered, "They need to see you in the admin building. Now." The walk through the terminal was a blur of shame. She could feel the stares of her colleagues, could hear the whispers that died the moment she looked their way. The office she was led to was a sterile, windowless room, furnished with nothing but a table and 3 chairs. Seated at the table were a stone-faced HR executive from corporate and a man in an expensive suit whose eyes held the cold, predatory stillness of a corporate lawyer. Daniel Garrett was nowhere to be seen. There was no one to defend her, no one to back her up. They didn't ask for her side of the story. They didn't ask for an explanation. The lawyer simply opened a laptop, turned it to face her, and pressed play. Susan Walsh's video filled the small screen. Bettina watched herself, a stranger in her own uniform. She saw the sneer on her face, the dismissive wave of her hand, the self-satisfied smirk as she challenged a decorated captain. She heard her own voice, sharp and laced with a petty, ugly authority, speak the words that had started it all. "You need to wait outside with the other passengers." She heard her own lie. "We have a male captain and first officer for this flight." As she watched, a wave of sickening cognitive dissonance washed over her. In her memory, she had been a diligent employee, holding a firm line against someone causing a disruption. But the video showed the unvarnished truth. It showed a bully drunk on a minuscule amount of power, cornered by a professional whose composure only highlighted her own unprofessionalism. There was no defense. The camera didn't lie. When the video ended, the silence in the room was absolute. Miss Kowalski, the HR executive, began her voice, devoid of any emotion. "Your actions represent a catastrophic failure to adhere to federally mandated security protocols, a gross violation of company policy, and have resulted in irreparable financial and reputational damage to this airline." The lawyer slid a single piece of paper across the table. "Your employment is terminated, effective immediately. Your final paycheck will be mailed to you. You will be escorted from the premises, and you are not to set foot on airport property again, except as a ticketed passenger." Bettina stared at the termination letter, the black ink blurring through a film of hot, angry tears. It wasn't fair. It was one mistake, one bad morning. But as she looked at the cold faces across the table, she knew her protests would be meaningless. She was no longer an employee. She was a liability being neutralized. As security escorted her through a back exit, she caught a glimpse of a news monitor in the terminal. Her own face, A still from the viral video was plastered across the screen. She wasn't just unemployed, she was infamous. Daniel Garrett's reckoning was quieter but no less devastating. He had barricaded himself in his office, frantically making calls trying to perform the managerial alchemy of transforming a catastrophe into a learning opportunity. He was still operating under the delusion that this could be contained, managed, spun. He left a dozen groveling voicemails for Frank O'Connell, drafted memos defending his actions as standard procedure in a potential security situation, and tried to rally his staff to present a unified front. His world collapsed, not with a bang, but with a single email that landed in his inbox with the finality of a guillotine. The subject line was stark: termination of employment. It was from the Executive VP of Operations. It was 2 sentences long. It stated that his staggering lack of judgment had directly led to the single greatest disaster in the company's history, and that his services were no longer required. His network access, it informed him, would be revoked in 60 seconds. He sat there staring at the screen as his email program disconnected, his corporate phone went dead, his digital identity as a manager erased. For 25 years, Apex Air had been his life. His authority, his identity, was tied up in his title, in the uniform he no longer wore, in the power he wielded over the Denver station. In his arrogance, he had seen Captain Roy not as the commander of $1 billion asset, but as a problem to be swatted away. He had gambled that his authority outranked her reality, and he had lost everything. He was no longer a station manager. He was just a man in a rumpled suit, sitting in a locked office, a pariah in the only industry he had ever known. For Apex Air, the reckoning was a corporate death spiral. Frank O'Connell's humiliating public apology was a masterclass in futility. Standing before a ravenous press corps, his face pale and drawn, he announced the firings and promised a top-to-bottom review of their culture. But his words were hollow, drowned out by the roar of their stock price cratering. The journalists smelled blood, and their questions were brutal. "Mr. O'Connell, can you put a price on institutional racism? How could your security protocols fail so completely? Is Apex Air a safe airline to fly?" He had no good answers. Everyone knew the apology wasn't about principle, it was about stopping the financial hemorrhage. It didn't work. The video was the story, and the story was that Apex Air was a company where a decorated black pilot could be treated like a trespasser. That narrative was poison. Within 2 weeks, the board, facing a shareholder revolt, forced Frank O'Connell's resignation. The company began its painful public dismemberment, selling off its new planes, abandoning routes, and laying off thousands of employees, pilots, mechanics, and flight attendants, who were now paying the price for a culture they didn't create, but were forced to endure. And Annalise Roy. She watched the firestorm from the quiet of her home. She was on paid leave, a ghost on a payroll of a company that was ceasing to exist. Her life had been turned upside down. The media was relentless, but she refused to be drawn into the spectacle. She knew that any public statement she made would be twisted, analyzed, and used as fuel for the very fire she wanted to extinguish. Her battle hadn't been about fame or fortune. It had been about professional dignity and operational safety. So with the help of the pilots' union, she crafted a single, powerful statement. It was a masterwork of professional restraint. On the morning in question, it read, "I executed my duties as pilot in command to ensure the safety of my flight. The principles of aviation safety are paramount and non-negotiable. My decision was based solely on my professional judgment and the extensive training I have received." She didn't mention race. She didn't have to. The video spoke for itself, and its silence on the matter made her statement all the more potent. It was the ultimate mic drop. She had simply done her job. Her phone rang constantly, but amid the media requests and messages of support from fellow pilots, one call stood out. The caller ID read simply, Viridian Dynamics. It was Robert Chen himself. "Captain Roy." He began, and his voice was one of profound respect. "I wanted to apologize, personally, for what you endured while in service to my company. What you did took an incredible amount of courage and integrity. You upheld the highest standards of your profession under immense pressure. That's the kind of character we value at Viridian." Annalise was taken aback by the directness. "Mr. Chen, thank you. I appreciate that. I was just trying to do my job." "No, Captain," Chen replied firmly. "You did more than that. You exposed a fatal weakness in a system. Frank O'Connell and his team saw a problem they needed to manage. You saw a standard that needed to be upheld. That's the difference between a manager and a leader." He paused the line quiet for a moment. "We are in the process of finding a new aviation partner. When we do, I want you to be a part of it. I want you to help us build their corporate flight program to serve as a consultant on safety and training protocols. Or if you prefer, I'd be honored to have you as the lead captain for our new executive fleet. The choice is yours. We want you on our team." The offer hung in the air, a lifeline of respect and opportunity, extended from the ashes of her old career. It wasn't just a job, it was a validation. It was a promise that her stand had not been in vain. It was the first clear sign of her new heading a flight path that would take her far higher than Apex Air ever could have. 6 months felt like both a lifetime and the blink of an eye. In that time, the aviation landscape had irrevocably shifted. Apex Air was no more. Its demise was not a sudden explosive event, but a slow, public, and agonizing bleed. After a painful bankruptcy preceding its remaining assets, a handful of aging planes and less desirable gate slots were bought for pennies on the dollar by a low-cost competitor. The brand, now permanently synonymous with prejudice and catastrophic failure, was quietly retired. Airport crews across the country took a certain satisfaction in peeling the once ambitious Apex logo from terminal walls and ground equipment. The company had become a cautionary tale, a modern-day Icarus whose wings weren't melted by the sun, but by the smoldering embers of its own toxic culture. The shutdown was absolute. Bettina and Daniel Garrett vanished into the kind of infamy reserved for viral video villains. Their names, blacklisted within the tightly knit and reputation-driven aviation community, became shorthand for a type of willful ignorance the industry was now being forced to confront. In response to the public outcry and pressure from pilots' unions, airlines across the country implemented new mandatory training programs. They were officially called things like Advanced Crew De-escalation or Frontline Security Protocol, but everyone unofficially called them the Apex Rule. They focused on crew identification, implicit bias, and the non-negotiable authority of a flight's commanding officers. Throughout this tumultuous period, Captain Annalise Roy maintained a quiet professional dignity. She had been on paid administrative leave from the dying husk of Apex, a procedural formality. The days had been strange. She'd wake up her body still on a pilot's clock and find herself grounded. The media storm was relentless. News vans were parked down the street from her quiet suburban home. Her phone buzzed with requests for interviews from every major network, offering her a platform to be angry, to be a victim, to be a crusader. She turned them all down, issuing only a single carefully worded statement through the pilots' union. She was a pilot, not a pundit. Her stand had been made in the execution of her duty, not for the cameras. Yet behind the calm exterior, she processed the weight of it all. She felt a profound sense of vindication. but it was tinged with a sadness for the thousands of Apex employees who lost their jobs, people who had done nothing wrong. She also felt the heavy mantle of being a symbol, a role she had never asked for. Other black pilots, men and women she had never met, reached out with messages of solidarity, sharing their own stories of subtle and overt discrimination. Her single act of defiance had opened a floodgate, and she felt a responsibility to honor their experiences by handling her newfound platform with grace and purpose. The job offers were immediate and overwhelming. CEOs of 2 major legacy airlines reached out to her personally, expressing their disgust at what had happened and making it clear that a captain of her caliber would always have a home with them. But it was the call from Robert Chen of Viridian Dynamics that charted her new course. He hadn't just offered her a job, he had offered her a mission. "I don't want to just give you a pilot seat, Captain," he had said, his voice direct and sincere. "I want to invest in your leadership. Help us ensure this never happens with our new aviation partner. Help them build a better culture." After gracefully resigning from Apex, she accepted. She didn't take a cushy desk job, nor did she confine herself to the executive fleet. Instead, she took on a unique hybrid role that was created just for her. She became the lead check airman and standards consultant for United Airlines, the new, far more prestigious carrier chosen by Viridian. Her job was to fly the line, training and evaluating new captains. But more than that, she was tasked with helping the airline's management refine their safety and operational protocols with a special emphasis on crew resource management, CRM, the very system that had collapsed so spectacularly at Gate A48. Her first official flight was scheduled 6 months to the day after the incident. The destination, fittingly, was San Jose. The departure airport was Denver. As she walked through the bustling concourse at Den, her new, crisp United uniform felt different. It felt heavier, imbued with a new sense of purpose. She passed by Gate A48. The space was now operated by another airline, the ghost of Apex Air completely exorcised. She paused for just a second, the memory of that morning replaying in her mind, the condescending tone, the public humiliation, the cold knot of anger. It felt like a scene from someone else's life, a lifetime ago. She took a breath and kept walking, leaving the memory behind where it belonged. When she arrived at her gate, C-37, the atmosphere was a world away from her last experience. The gate agent, a young man with a bright professional smile, saw her approach and immediately stood straighter. "Welcome, Captain Roy. We've been expecting you," he said, his voice filled with genuine respect. "Everything is ready for you on board. The flight plan is uploaded and the ground crew is standing by." He scanned her credentials before she had even fully extended her hand. "Have a great flight." It was simple, respectful, normal. It was how it was always supposed to be. On board the gleaming Boeing 787 Dreamliner, a significant step up from the 737, her new first officer, a sharp young woman named Jessica, greeted her. "It's an absolute honor to fly with you." "Captain Jessica," said her eyes shining with admiration. She, like every other young pilot in the country, knew the story. "The honor is mine," Jessica Annalise replied, her smile genuine and warm. "Let's get to work." As she settled into the vast, technologically advanced cockpit, running her hands over the smooth, responsive controls, she looked out at the sprawling airfield. The view from the Dreamliner's cockpit was panoramic, expansive. It felt like a metaphor for her own future. She had never sought to be a hero. Her world was one of physics, procedure, and precision. But on one Tuesday morning, that world had been challenged by something far more chaotic and ugly, By refusing to yield, by using the authority she had earned through years of dedication and skill, she hadn't just stood up for herself. She had forced an entire industry, however reluctantly, to look in the mirror. The engines spooled up with a powerful, reassuring roar, the sound of progress, of moving forward. She keyed the microphone, her voice, calm, confident, and utterly in command, resonating through the cabin for the passengers and crew who had placed their trust in her. "Good morning, folks. This is your captain speaking. Welcome aboard our non-stop service to San Jose. On behalf of the entire crew, it's our pleasure to have you with us today." She paused, glancing out at the clear, boundless Colorado sky. It's a beautiful day to fly. And as the plane accelerated down the runway, a surge of immense power under her command, lifting gracefully into the endless blue. Annalise Roy wasn't just leaving Denver behind. She was ascending a living testament to the fact that true authority comes not from a uniform or a title, but from an unwavering integrity that no amount of prejudice can ever ground. The story of Captain Annalise Roy is a powerful reminder that one person's unwavering commitment to their principles can trigger an avalanche of change. It wasn't a bomb or a computer virus that brought down Apex Air. It was the quiet, steely resolve of a professional who refused to be diminished. Her story exposes the dangerous intersection of prejudice and safety, showing how a culture of disrespect can become a multi-billion-dollar liability. This is a testament to the fact that karma, especially in the corporate world, can be swift and unforgiving when it's finally called to account. What Captain Roy did wasn't just for her. It was for every person who has ever been judged by their appearance instead of their qualifications. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button to help us share it with more people. Consider subscribing and turning on notifications so you don't miss our next video. And we want to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever witnessed a moment where one person's stand made a huge difference? Thank you for watching.